Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our New Metrics for Success webinar. I'm very pleased that you can all be here. We have a number of panellists today and we're meeting mostly from home, from various states in Australia and overseas. And so, of course, we're all on using technology. Can we just say that while we're relying on the technology and we're very confident, sometimes there are some disturbances. We have some technology people in the background who will quickly fix those. So just hoping that everything goes as planned, but if it doesn't, then stay with us. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jim Waterston, the Dean of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, to open the webinar. Many of you know Jim from his varying and very successful roles in education in Victoria, Western Australia, the ACT and Queensland, where he has held senior leadership roles, including Directors General in Queensland and ACT. And many of you, I think, may also know him from his 6 years as the National President of the Australian Council for Educational Leaders. Jim brings great depth and diversity to his role as Dean. So it's my great pleasure to ask Jim to open the webinar. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jane. It's really great to be involved in this New Metrics webinar. So can I start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which the university resides, and extend this acknowledgement to various Indigenous lands where you're all today. I'd also like to pay respect to elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. It's a great opportunity for me to be able to be amongst our world-class professors from the university. So can I also acknowledge John Hattie, Yong Zhao and Sandra Milligan, who will also be presenting today, and who bring a great depth of understanding of the issues in schools at the moment. And I too am looking forward to listening to them today. Can I also acknowledge all colleagues that have joined us today? This is a great opportunity for the University of Melbourne, through the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and through many of our schools across Australia, to collaborate to do what I think we would like to do more of in terms of bringing our collective wisdom to focusing on a post-COVID world. And we're all certain, I think, if there's one thing we can agree on, that a post-COVID world in education will look very different to the world that preceded COVID-19. And it's been said so many times in the last few months, but I'll say it again anyway. We should never waste a crisis, and this is a crisis. It's a crisis from a humanity point of view, but certainly a crisis from an educational point of view, because things weren't altogether perfect before COVID. And so this reset that we're now thinking about as we go forward is something that we probably wished we hadn't gone through from a virus point of view, but it does open up an opportunity for us to rethink the way that we need to look at education to ensure every young person is successful. What we learned, and what we are learning during COVID, is that the change from a face-to-face environment to a virtual environment or an external environment was pretty much bottom-up led. We didn't have time to create strategic plans, and teachers were pretty much the architects in every single context of the changes that occurred. Some of those changes worked better than others, but it's the first time in my career where I've seen every teacher right across the nation agree that something needed to be done, and done fast. And overall, the commitment and the passion and the engagement in this change process has been outstanding. So that holds us in good stead as we go forward. As we think about what we need to do going forward, we now know that if everyone's engaged, if everyone agrees on the plan, then we can make the changes that we need. And so I'm really interested to listen to Sandra, John and Yong talk about those changes and provide an insight into the opportunities that we're hoping to provide you in partnership with our graduate school as we go forward, to think about some of these big picture problems together. So without any further ado, I'll hand back to you, Jane. I look forward to being connected to many of our colleagues as we go forward through this program. Thank you.
The structure of this morning's webinar is that our three speakers, Sandra, John and Yong, will have a brief opportunity to talk to us about their thinking around new metrics. We will then have some more information about the actual program from Sandra and a Q&A session. So you will find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So you may want to start noting your questions as we go. So if you would please, as you're putting your questions in, could you also just type your name and school? Should we need to follow up, then we have that information. We may not get to answer all of the questions today, so that would be most helpful. I will actually ask the questions. You won't get an opportunity to ask them directly. So if you would like to direct it to one of the speakers, then please put that in as well. But for the moment, I am going to hand over to Enterprise Professor Sandra Milligan, who is the Director of the Assessment Research Centre. Thank you, Sandra.
Okay, thanks, Jane. I just want to point out before I start to make all our Melbourne and Victorian-based participants feel terribly jealous that I'm in Perth at the moment, where they have no COVID restrictions whatsoever at all, as far as I can tell. I'm on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and it's just a pleasure to feel normal for a little while. So I hope that's made you feel worse. No, not really. It's terrific. Look, over the last 4 years, we at the MGSE have established a number of research partnerships with a range of organisations that I call first movers. I'll come back to that term later. And in these research partnerships, we at the university have learned a lot about the conditions that apply in education in the modern world. And we like to think that our research partners, who are typically schools or other organisations, have benefited from the research partnership as well. And the idea behind this new metrics project is that we would like to see if there are others interested in joining this sort of partnership and to extend it to other organisations or other first movers in the Australian community. Probably the best way I could explain what we had in mind is to give you a little bit more detail about the partnerships that we've had, because we're looking to extend the work that we've done in that area. By first movers, I mean organisations that we've worked with who have really a bee in their bonnet about improving education, who have decided that they can't wait for the systems or the general population or even the community to move, and have taken matters into their own hands, in their own context, moving carefully forward, trying to improve matters for their students. One of the things I think that they've got in common is that they have looked at the situation of their students and the lives that they're expected to live in this century of COVID, unemployment, artificial intelligence, climate change, and said, well, how are our students going to thrive in school and beyond? Are we teaching them what they really need to know? And the thing that the first movers have in common, I think, is that they think that we can do better. And they've moved to do that in their own context with their own communities, and they've done it in partnership with us. Now, just to give you a few examples of the sort of challenges, the practical challenges that these first movers have taken. I've chosen to mention a few. There are others that these have all been written about, so I can refer you to some case studies and so forth. But for instance, Beenleigh Senior High on the Gold Coast in Queensland, very low SES area. The students were leaving school after having a wonderful school experience, but none of them could get jobs. So the school decided there must be something that we can do to better equip our kids to get jobs. And so then over a number of years, they've developed links and curricula and so forth that embed the school much more much more deeply into the local community so that the students thrive more than they otherwise would. Liverpool Boys School, another low SES school, wonderful kids, terrific program, wonderful skills, but ATAR didn't suit them. So Liverpool decided to establish a new way of representing how their students, what their students know and can do, and working with universities to represent an alternative approach to the ATAR, very strong. There are primary schools who are saying, well, you know, the one thing that our students are going to need to thrive into the future that perhaps we're not giving them as much as we could is the capacity to learn on their own, knowing how to learn as lifelong learners. Why don't we teach that? Why don't we assess that? Why don't we structure our school program in ways to say that that's what we want? We've worked with groups of schools who are saying, okay, the Australian curriculum says that general capabilities are really important these days, not just the general capabilities in the Australian curriculum, but more broadly, knowing how to learn, enterprise thinking, social entrepreneurialism. Is our curriculum geared for students to actually learn those things? And they have decided, no, probably not, and have set about changing what they do in the school to equip kids better with those kinds of things. I could go on. Also, I mean, we've worked with governments in other countries who have similar sorts of aspirations in schools that are much less resourced than ours. And the thing that they have in common is that they're trying to broaden the definition of success of a thriving learner beyond things like NAPLAN, beyond the formal curriculum in the school, to encompass a range of other things. I'll come back to that. The directions that these first movers are taking, even though they're very different organisations, are surprisingly similar. I think all of them tend to start with a question: what should students know and be able to do by the time they leave us that will ensure that they've not only thrived in our community, but will thrive in their next steps? So if it's primary school into secondary, secondary school into tertiary or work. So what do students need to know and be able to do? And generally speaking, the answer to that is a lot more. They need to know and be able to do a lot more than we represent in things like NAPLAN, ATAR, VCE, and even the sort of A to E or 80% sort of reports that we send home to parents. So they start with the idea of the general capabilities being very important and very broadly thought through. They really focus on getting students to have agency in their own learning so that they can drive their own learning through life. And that takes a bit of setting up in the school. They also, I think, are more committed to I don't know what the word is, maybe customising how they teach and what they teach to better reflect who the students are. I mean, sometimes that's called passion, allowing the students' passion to come in, or their interests, or the community context, allowing that into the school to frame the sort of learning that they give. This is particularly important in Aboriginal communities, where often what a student knows and knows how to do is not really reflected strongly in the school curriculum. And so the schools want to redress that so that students feel as though they belong in the school, that their interests and passions are reflected in the teaching and in the learning, and that the schools can represent the full range of what students know and can do at that time. The sort of particular techniques that schools are picking up on, you will have all heard of them before, but they're increasingly looking at generalised progressions in general capabilities or in sense of belonging that enable a school to have an idea of a common curriculum, but so it can be expressed in the particular context that they're in, whether that's an Aboriginal community or a farming community or a leafy urban community. They're looking at learner profiles to represent the breadth of capacity of kids, not just the more narrow sort of things that we're used to. They're using different assessment methods, because you can't use standardised tests or pen and paper tests to assess these sorts of competencies. So they're looking at increased use of teacher judgment, which teachers love, increased use of performance-based assessments, increased use of not making a big difference between formative and summative assessment. Summative is just formative at point X when you want to report it. How to build learner profiles and so forth. So there's a few skills where they're helping their teachers upskill so that they can manage this broader conception of where they're going. The next thing that you find, of course, is if you're wanting to develop students' capacities in things like critical thinking or knowing how to learn or enterprise or entrepreneurial thinking or a range of things like that, you can't just stand up, deliver and teach with kids in nice, neat rows or in groups. The pedagogy and the organisation of teaching and learning needs to change as well. So the schools are grappling with that kind of thing. Now, obviously, that's project-based learning, passion-based learning, all of those kinds of things. But as we see some of these first movers moving forward, they really are challenging a whole pile of things about how a teacher teaches and what expertise in teaching looks like, and who students learn from. They don't just learn from the teacher, they learn from each other, they learn from agents outside the school. So it's really broadening the sense of how organisation of teaching and learning can happen. Now that happens after a few years, but it's really interesting that our first movers are gradually starting to rethink some of the very fundamentals of how teaching is organised and how learning is organised. You've probably heard of that expression, the new grammar of schooling, and that's what that's referring to. It's saying that some of the things that have held our schools in place for a number of years, like a class with one teacher, age grade progression, reports that report on a fairly narrow range of things. These things are changing or being replaced by things that are more fit for purpose. We've actually found that these research partnerships are terribly useful for us because I think the way forward in a fast-moving industry is always going to be working with the first movers, because you can't invent something in a head office of a education department and implement it and expect it to be right when you've got a fast-moving, that might have worked in the 1950s, but I don't think it works in the 2020s. So the increase in the new thinking in schooling has got to come from schools, and we're very keen to help. We think that we can help by providing a bit of research credibility. A number of our first movers, I mean, there's a big job to convince school communities to change sometimes, parents, grandparents, kids. And so having a research partner like Melbourne University has been found, I think, I don't think I'm putting words in people's mouths, to be very helpful for the credibility of the project, our capacity to publicise, to connect schools with other first movers, both in Australia and internationally, I think has been, we've found that very exciting, and I think our partners have as well. So what we're looking for in this new metrics project is to extend what has been a really terrific series of partnerships for us. And so we're really keen that if you, in your own schools, in your own context, believe that you've got to be in your bonnet about ways you can improve your students' capacity to thrive, and you think it would be helpful to connect with the university and other first movers, then we'd love to talk with you about it. At that point, John, can I flip to you and see if you've got any added comments?
Sure, thanks, Sandra. I want to start with a problem that's beguiling me at the moment. Given COVID is all around us in most parts of Australia, Sandra, everyone talks about social and emotional learning, well-being. And the question that I've been worrying about is, what parts of well-being are schools responsible for? What parts are parents? Because my worry is that yet again, we're going to ask schools to take on another responsibility. And many schools are lapping it up and saying, yes, we want to care about well-being. And you're right, we should care about well-being. But what parts of it? Is it, as I would argue, is the well-being about learning? Or do you have to worry and ask our teachers to now take on the role of school counsellors in the classroom? And so my question is, what are the nature of the outcomes that you want to take responsibility for in your school? Then I add to that, I'm working with 5 schools at the moment in rural Victoria, going through a massive change process for all kinds of reasons. And we've been doing a lot of interviews. We've done Delphi surveys with parents, with the business community, with the principals, with the staff, about what they want this new school to have an effect on students. Now we're up to 320 odd outcomes. Really? And everybody can stand up at a meeting and passionately argue for their subset of outcomes. Then I look at the Mabatu Declaration that all governments in Australia agreed to in Alice Springs last year. It's ginormous. So you know this in your communities. And so one of the key things that school leaders have to do is to back themselves to say, these are the things that we want to influence in this school. It can't be everything. And what's more, it's going to be based on good discovery and diagnosis of where we are now. And then we're going to pick some parts which we're going to focus on to improve. It's no different for students in classrooms. The amount of pressure on them to be brilliant at everything sometimes means some students pull out of our system and don't like being in this place called school. So this notion of new metrics, I think is very exciting, where we work with schools to help them understand what is actually happening in the school at the moment, where are the opportunities to have the enhancement and to hone in and focus on those, and overall make the learning lives of students really great. And then I sit there with my hat on in AITSL talking to governments. And you know the pressure. NAPLAN, 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 PISA, PISA, PISA. And what I'm trying to do with the PISA group at the moment is to convince them to broaden their metrics a long way from achievement. It's like my view on NAPLAN. It's not going to go away, but it's taken on such a priority. And as you've said, Sandra, sometimes for some kids, it's not a priority. But our school systems are measured on such narrow metrics. So how do we broaden them and look at the kinds of things that we want to do? 20 years ago in a different country, I was involved with a very similar debate back then, where schools, particularly high schools, were very, very dependent on an equivalent to NAPLAN, university selection. Hierarchies were built in schools around that. And the government just got up one day and said, that's it. we're not going to do this anymore. Schools aren't concerned with selecting to universities. We are going to certify children on the basis of what they can do and what they can do well, whether it be in panel beating, baristaship, chemistry, or history. Now, that was unbelievable turmoil. The whole schooling system was disrupted. The privileged teachers in certain areas weren't so happy. On and on it went. It has been the most remarkable success, if for no other reason than 80% of the kids were finishing high school in that country. 3 years later, 95% of kids were finishing schools in that country. And this is one of the essence of this notion of new metrics. How do you get a broadened notion of what we value? And we don't have to choose between NAPLAN or not NAPLAN, ATAR or not ATAR, but how do they merge and how does that fit for your school? How do you better understand the progression you're making from the discovery and baseline to where you want to be? I would argue that as school leaders, you are in the best place to decide about the nature of interventions. But this is where we would love to work with you about how you then evaluate the success you're having from where you are to where you want to be. And then how you can use that to not only drive your success in your school, but I also hope that you stand and smell the roses when you do get that kind of success. So this is a very exciting time. Godsky too is well worth going back and reading because they spoke about this in great length. They looked at how we turn our system around to actually focus on progress through to achievement, how we can look at the different kinds of metrics that we need in our school to get a much more nuanced and balanced and more effective than the very narrow ones that many governments and parents, and sadly sometimes even our educators, see as the narrow kinds of notions. They don't always fit every kid or necessarily every school. And also, how do we then look at valuing the expertise when we get success? I don't think I've worked in a school yet where there haven't been pockets of success. How do we change our current dilemma from looking at failure and trying to fix it to identifying success and trying to scale it up? And that's the basis of the new metrics, not only for the teachers, but also for the students. But Sandra, I think it would be fair to say that we are the biggest learners in this game, and we are very keen that as part of this learning, how can we come together to better understand how we can get our new metrics and focus on upscaling the success we have. Yong, it's your turn, sir.
All right, thanks, John. Following both Sandra and Lynn, Sandra, I think, and John's comments, I want to really just say this is a very exciting moment. Since I just joined MGSE, I've been playing with the idea about what should students know and be able to do. So from my understanding, I think there are really at least two parts. We call this the public good and the private good. That is, what does every student need to know and be able to do as a citizen? That's one set of outcomes we need to measure. But then what would make each and every individual student successful or thrive, to use Sandra's term? You know, what would that be? I think that's a big question every school has to work on. Right now, government curriculum does not delineate that. You know, the Australian curriculum says everybody should do this, but really should everybody be able to do the same thing to thrive? But what actually gets me more excited is really the possibility of working with you, with schools. Because I know that, you know, we have different jobs in life. You know, our job at universities is to conduct research, generate knowledge, to learn, to read, to do a lot more reading, you know. But your job are leading schools, are making the changes. So I'm hoping that, you know, your experiences and your vision and ours can collaborate, can help each other. I think that's another thing, because I've worked with the schools in Australia, in quite a lot of schools in Australia, in the US and in China and different places. I want to see this opportunity to truly benefit, because we read a lot more. We spend time doing this. And so we would like to share that, but we will learn a lot from you. And then the third point I want to emphasize is that COVID has truly highlighted the value of change. I think Jim, in your talking early on, is absolutely right. I think many schools have done some sort of remote learning, and many schools are eager to throw remote learning away. Should they be thrown away when we think about new metrics? Should we rethink about reorganizing our schools, our classrooms, like Sandra was talking about the grammar of schooling? Should we really divide into these areas? So everything about that piece relates to what we want to teach our students and how we want to teach our students. And then there's another point. I really believe systems will not be able to deliver the change we want. So you, as the great leaders, you signed up for the webinar, you want to learn more, you want to think about this. You are the leaders, you are the first movers, like Sandra was talking about. You will be leading this possibility. I think education, as we know, needs change, but simply relying on government, on systems to lead the change, it's almost impossible. We need individual school leaders to work together to make that change possible. And then the final point is that I think the change every schools will take will be different. We'll be working with you to devise different changes. I'm also believing changes should not apply to the entire school. Actually, I think it shouldn't apply to the entire school because you can't possibly convince everybody to do this. I'm more believing in a model called, school within a school. You have new possibilities. A few students, a few teachers, part of your school, then gradually that may move over. It's of course, admirable if we can change the entire school, but I think that's going to take a long time. So what I think this model, this new metrics model we are trying to work with you, is to work with you. And so you can work with us and all other partners who will join this network, and then to think about what's possible in your school. What a new profile for each student would look like, a new possibility of thinking. So this is a truly exciting moment. I'm really eager and to be working with all of you to create the change that's possible. And these changes are not necessarily new, or at least not brand new. Changes can happen, as Jim said, and has happened, and we can create more changes. Thank you. Back to you, Jane.
Great. Thank you, Yong. I just thought I would mention, in case people don't know, that Professor Yong Zhao is now with the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. So we're really thrilled to have him on our staff and working with us on this. Okay, I'm about to hand over to Sandra in a minute, and in the meantime, I also need to get the slide pack up. Sandra will just very briefly, because we've got quite a few questions coming in, Sandra, so we need to make this quite brief. Just cover off on sort of some of the nitty-gritty of how we think we can establish this partnership with you. So I'll hand over to Sandra, if you can start while I quickly get my screen organised.
So a couple of, just one thought that flipped through my head as I was listening to John and Yong. We in education often talk about the big questions and try and work out what should we do. And, every politician, every newspaper, every parent has got a particular view about what we should do. And as John said, if you look at things like the Alice Springs Declaration, the job for education is impossibly huge, and we're put upon from all sides to do that. One of the things I've absolutely loved about the research partnerships that we've been in with the first movers is that these first movers, as John and Yong have said, are very clear about what they can and can't do. They live in the practical world of what you're going to do tomorrow, and they have a sort of longer term view of where they might be able to get their schools in a few years' time. And in my view, the way to tackle some of these big questions, like can we use learner profiles instead of the ATAR? Well, I think the answer is yes, but to work out how to do that, it's going to be by practical steps, by first movers who have addressed this in their own context and are convincing when these discussions come up. So I think the power of a research partnership, which is led by schools' view of what's possible and practical, will actually get us where we want to be as a community faster than any systemic, wide-ranging change, because it lives in the world of the possible and the practical, not the abstract and idealized and standardized. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's one of the things I've really valued about working with these first movers. They know what they want to do. They do it. They're not swayed. It's practical, and it leads to the big questions, and it leads to leadership by these first movers to the big questions. So what we see, what we want to do by having the new metrics project is that we can amplify the practical, sensible, focused issues of schools that are tackling these problems. In quite a bit of the work that we've been doing on things like ATAR and learner profiles, by working with a group of schools who are all tackling it, we've been able to represent their work much more powerfully as a group. So I call that amplification. So I think schools that become our new first movers can expect that their work will get amplified by the University of Melbourne and by the other first movers, and therefore have more of an impact on steering the system through in a practical manner. I think also we're able to, the aim of the project is to support schools with the challenge of rethinking things. I mean, sometimes it really helps to have the technical skills, the consultancy support that a university like ours can bring to bear on your practical problems. So we hope to be able to mobilise that sort of support for our new first movers. And we also think that working through what these new metrics might be to support the sort of initiatives will be important. John mentioned NAPLAN, everyone talks about ATAR. These are certainly insufficient and possibly wrong. But we'll only find out by schools actually thinking through what they want to achieve for their students and what would be better or additional or different measures and metrics that schools should be held to. So we think that we can help in that sort of way. In this new metrics project, I think there would be two partners. There would be the university and the schools. So let me just flick through quickly what our commitment, the university's commitment, is to anyone who would join up. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. The first thing is that one thing that we're really good at is getting smart people together from all over the world. I noticed in the questions that someone asked, are we leveraging the GELP work on assessment? Yes, of course we will be. Between John and Yong and me and other academics, we're members of a lot of these networks, and we wish to bring them all to bear for the benefit of the first movers that we work with. So I call that our capacity to establish connections will certainly bring to our first movers. We'd like to provide access to technology and consulting support and research support that individual schools might need to work their way through their own set of solutions. We also think we can have some impact on system level policies. Like a lot of schools in Victoria say to us, oh, look, there's so many requirements that the system has that we hardly have the bandwidth to think about things like this. Well, this is with our connections with education departments and so forth, we might be able to parlay some of that pressure off schools and certainly in terms of policy debates that are coming up, like ATAR, we can certainly discuss these things with authorities and try and get movement on the policy side of things to support schools. We're really keen to publish some of the work that's being done. We're just about to publish the work of written by the leadership of the school from Bean Lee, with the work that they've been doing with us. And there are other, and we can publish as well. So again, this is a form of amplification. We certainly want to organise convenings of the First Movers group, because in our experience, people learn most off their peers. And we think that assisting those connections and interactions will be very helpful, and we'll provide the resources like project officers and so forth to support the work of schools. From the point of view of what we think the school commitment would be, or our research partner commitment, this is something that we'd need to talk through. But looking at our first movers over the last 4 years or so, we can see the sort of commitments that they've made. And, you know, they're things like committing to change over time. So this isn't a sort of a, you know, let's have a crack this year and see if we change our mind. They tend to have had a long-term commitment to change in their own context. So I guess we'd be looking to work with people who have that long-term commitment to change, because nothing in education turns on a sixpence, really. It's all long-term work. We'd certainly like the school leadership to be leading in the school and interacting with us. So we see it as a whole school thing that the school leadership team would need to be committed to. So we'd be hoping to work very closely with the leadership team in particular. We also hope that the school would be interested in building the capacity of their leadership team to be entrepreneurial school leaders, so that we'd like to be in a position to be able to promote your entrepreneurial leadership team as being a first mover, and therefore providing leadership not only in your school, but to the system broadly. And of course, another part of it, this is the part where everyone in academe gets embarrassed and tongue-tied, but we do need some, you to pay some fees, because we need to fund it, and governments don't fund universities anymore. So there would be a fee attached to this, but it would be a sliding scale built on school size, and we hope that it would not be onerous for schools. I think, Jane, we can't get these slides up, but we can presumably send them to people later. We've just got details on that.
Yes, and we may just get a couple of them up right at the end. We'll see how we can organise that.
Okay. Now we're actually looking to have we're not looking for very many schools. We're looking for the right schools to work with who want to join into this new metrics or first movers initiative. And any more than about, Jane, could you go on to the next one? Any more than about 30, probably 20 to 30 schools is optimal. That's probably all we can manage. We will select schools if there are more who apply, based on our view of the degree to which there is a win-win for the school and for us in this sort of partnership. There's an online application up, which it would be good if you are interested to discuss further, to fill it in by the 28th of October or ring Angela. And we should be very clear about how many we've selected by November the 16th. So in terms of planning, that should we should have it all nailed by November the 16th. I should also add that we'd want to be in discussion with you if you are interested over that time, because this isn't just a program that you would slot into you know, it's all set up. It's something that we would be working in partnership with you to work out what's in your interest, what's in your interests, what you would like to get out of it, what we can contribute, what we'd like to get out of it. So it is indeed a partnership, not a program. So although those dates look black and white, there should be some discussion over that time. Jane, I might just stop there.
Terrific, thank you. Look, we have got a number of questions that have now come in, and some we're answering along the way, including that, yes, the recording will be available, and we'll send out information about that probably a day or so, you know, hopefully by tomorrow or the next day. There's a thread coming through the questions that I'm going to direct firstly, I think, to Sandra, but then possibly John or Yong would like to pick it up, which is about the appetite of the tertiary institutions and business in terms of these sorts of changes that we're talking about, the new metrics, the breadth, the way in which we can represent students' capabilities. And really the point is being made in the questions that some of these changes really are dependent on what the attitude of tertiary institutions and business might be to this. So Sandra, can I ask you to just reflect on some of your experiences in regard to that, and then perhaps hand on to John or Yong?
Look, I'm really clear about this because a number of our first movers are actually working with employers and tertiary institutions to try and set up, say, learner profiles instead of ATAR, or assessment of competencies that employers would want. And the thing that I notice is this: employers say, when will schools change? Universities say, well, we'd be happy to change if you could just give us the information. And schools say, well, we'd give you the information if you just read it. And so I sort of feel as though there's a disconnect. And one of the things that in our research partnerships, Jane will know this, we're working with big picture schools, developing a learner profile that 15 universities have now committed to looking at very closely as an alternative to ATAR to get in. So what you have to do, in my view, is work with the employers, work with the tertiary institutions, and show them what's possible. Those institutions and employers are suffering from the same sort of influences that schools are. They know that the ATAR is not the best representation of success for students in the tertiary sector. They know that the VCE is not a really good representation of what a potential worker knows and can do. So everyone's got the same diagnosis. We just need to work together to get the act together. And I think that's one of the areas where the research partnerships have really paid off. And in addition, I'd put parents in that category as well. Parents don't want to disadvantage their students. And so a number of our first movers are working very closely with their local communities to bring them with them. And they're usually, they know that the world is changing. They want their students to thrive. So if you can give them a convincing story that you know a better way, they're in there 100%. But it's not a one size fits all, which is where we think the research partnership is so powerful. Yong and John, I don't know whether you want to add to that.
Certainly in terms of employers, if you look at what they're asking for now, if you have higher in any subject, whether it be history, panel beating or maths, and you're also high on social skills, social sensitivity, working in teams, you're employable. But the most fascinating thing is that students who are not so high in some of those content areas, but are higher in social skills, are very employable. And I worry, for instance, about maths and science and any subject that we privilege just high achievement. And as a consequence, we're doing them damage when they go for an employment. So broadening it. So they're asking for that now. That's not a thing in the future. Similarly, like take the University of Melbourne to get into our teacher education program. There are close to 20 different dimensions you have to look at besides achievement. And so universities are willing, I think, to do this. I think it might take a final push to push some of those subjects up in the 99% area across the line. But even in medical school, they no longer want just high achievers, because they realise if you just have high achievers, you get researchers, not doctors. And so they're looking for the breadth as well. So the time is right to do this, but it's going to require a bit of courage from someone to actually make the difference. And that's why we're doing this project.
I just want to add 2 points. One is that remember, whatever systems we're using now, ATAR, NAPLAN, or other things, were invented a while back. So basically trying to say that's not working, you need to invent something new. So whenever you invent something new, there's always a chance of being accepted, but you have to keep working at that. I think with Melbourne, that's very possible. The second point that I want to make is that I saw we have primary schools, secondary schools. The new metrics is not only about showing universities, showing future employers, it's showing us as educators to see, showing the students, showing the parents, how the students are modifying their progress, are driving this thing. Like what John was saying, like social emotional learning, which actually I've written a lot about that. It's a horrible idea. You know, it's a good thing to have, but it's a horrible idea. It's been done in schools. Schools are buying packages, are buying pre-packaged materials, are doing certification. It's horrible, because the reason we have students are sad is because our curriculum was not delivered the right way. But anyway, there's different ways to think about that. So I think there are really more purposes than just serving the other people. I also saw that, you know, on the discussion, the Q&A part, a lot of questions are very sensible questions. You've raised a lot of sensible questions, but most of them may have to be dealt with when we start the program, because many of them has a lot of different answers, a lot of readings, a lot of research to support that.
Great, thank you, Yong, and Sandra and John. Another question that there's been a couple of people hitting on is the question of influence with education departments and ministries and so on. So again, any of our panelists, can you talk about the way in which either you can see you have been able to influence in the past, and what is in the pipeline in terms of using the first movers' work to be able to influence policy going forward?
Well, I can have a quick go at that. A couple of our first movers are actually government authorities. If there are people from, I know there are people from South Australia here, and we've been working with a group of schools in South Australia in close association with the SACE board, which is, you know, the Accreditation and Certification Authority. And in fact, I would say that the SACE board is probably leading in Australia in terms of rethinking what senior secondary curriculum assessment, recording and reporting would be. And that, so it's not true to say that education systems and authorities are always the ones that have to be you know, pushed along. Sometimes they're pulling, and we're certainly working with the people who are pulling. Reports like the Shergold Review and the Gonski Review, they are enormously supportive of the sort of work that we've been doing with first movers. And we're finding increasingly that as these reports are written, the reviewers are listening to and watching what our first movers are doing. So it establishes a virtuous circle going forward. And we think that the university can really help with that by increasing this virtuous circle. The other thing I would say is that there is a huge amount of flexibility in systems for schools if they wish to take it. And if they're supported with a group of peers and an organisation like Melbourne, there's very little that you can't do that you'd want to do that is actually prohibited by the systems, so that we haven't found yet anywhere with our first movers, and they've done some amazing things where the system has held up a hand and said no, no, no. Usually the system is very interested in what's going. So I think that's one of the advantages of formalising this, so that people can see that we're serious, that we're careful, and that we want to take this forward. So I don't actually think the systems are a problem. Changing them might be, but we can do that together.
Great. Look, thank you, Sandra. I'm going to cut us off now because our time really is running out. Just to reiterate on some of the information you've been given, we're very keen for people, of course, to consider applying through the online application process. It is very simple. There are really just 3 questions and the opportunity for you to upload documents or things that you have already produced. So we don't want to make the application process onerous. Tomorrow, in fact, I think later today, you will get an email. So all attendees will receive an email with that information about how to apply. We will include the slides, some of which you saw today, but some of which you didn't, but that really just contain that sort of detailed information about this process. And also, as I think we've said, the recording will be available, and we'll let you know how you can access that. October the 28th is sort of our pseudo deadline for applications. And as Sandra said, we're really keen to engage with you over the next few weeks as you're thinking about this. We will be notifying people around mid-November, so that you will know that you are in the process. And if you're not, then we're also keen to keep talking with partners. Can I now thank the 4 presenters, so Jim, Sandra, John and Yong, for your presentations. We hope for the people listening that it's given you a little bit of a flavour of why we're excited about building these partnerships with you, and that we really do see this as one of the most potentially rewarding but also effective ways of supporting schools, but also generating change for all young people, children and young people across education systems. Can I also quickly thank the support people behind the scenes who've done really all the work to get us to this point, and wish you all a very good day, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.